Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. At long last, we've reached the end of the hate speech series. If you don't know anything about this series or why I'm making this video, in what way or how I was accused by Watchtower of hate speech, please go back and watch the first few episodes in this series where it will all become clear. Suffice to say, it came to my attention that my former religion, Jehovah's Witnesses, tried to get me thrown off the IICSA inquiry, the independent investigation into child sexual abuse for England and Wales. I was a core participant, still am, because they failed in their attempt. But they wanted to get me thrown off the investigation. Behind my back, they sent a letter to the investigation. Here it is, dated February 4th, 2020, accusing me of being a hate speech enthusiast. And in support of this accusation, they put together a 9-page dossier titled Statements by Lloyd Evans Inciting Religious Hatred Against Jehovah's Witnesses on YouTube and Twitter. If you've watched the previous episodes in this series, you will know that this document is just a tissue of lies from beginning to end, employing all sorts of trickery and misquotes and changing what I've said, plucking things out of context, exactly the sort of shenanigans you would quite frankly expect from Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. If you haven't seen it, again, go back and watch the earlier episodes. We're now at the end. There's only one more page out of the 9 pages, and it's titled Profane and Offensive Statements About God, Jesus, and the Bible. Apparently, Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, my former religion, considered me to be disqualified from the role of core participant to the investigation because I'm an outspoken atheist. So apparently it's not just about my criticisms of Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm not allowed to criticize the Bible or theism and help the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse as a core participant. What they're essentially calling for here in this document is discrimination against me as an atheist. They seem to have been banking on IICSA to be skewed towards theism or Christianity. I think they were banking on IICSA to discriminate against me on that basis. That's all I can gather really from this page, because all they've done is find examples in my videos and in one tweet where I've said unflattering things about the Bible or about God, and they're hoping that this will be enough. In fact, let me read the one and only footnote on this page. You can see there's a footnote there at the bottom. The European Convention on Human Rights, Articles 9 and 10, brackets 2, prohibits expressions that are, in regards to objects of veneration, are gratuitously offensive to others and profane, and statements that incite religious intolerance. And then it gives a number of examples of case law. Incidentally, I will just mention that my colleague Kim Silvio, who is a legal advisor to jwwatch.org, has been going over this whole document with a fine-tooth comb, and she's brought to my attention the fact that the Watchtower Legal Department, Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, have not been, shall we say, accurate in their quoting of case law. I'm not necessarily saying that's the case here, although it seems a bit iffy. I'm saying this more applies to previous parts of this series, but rather than focusing on all the legal nuances, when it comes to these footnotes. I'm happy to just focus purely on what it was that I said and leave you, the viewer, to decide whether I've been hateful or not. But in this case, they seem to be suggesting that it's against the law to be an outspoken atheist. Who knew? Anyway, first example on the list is not a YouTube video. It's a tweet. Just a quick disclaimer. Many of you will understand, or those of you who watch my videos regularly will understand, that I try to limit my use of swear words. However, that's not true in general. It's not the case that I don't swear in general. Those who are close to me know that I do occasionally F-bomb, and I have been known to F-bomb very occasionally on this channel and elsewhere on social media, and the following tweet includes an F-bomb. So if this is upsetting to any viewers, please avert your gaze or skip to a later point in the video. Here is the tweet in question from December 8th, 2019. I am Jesus Christ, a real game about a wizard who fucks around with magic in 1st century Palestine before vanishing as part of an elaborate plan that involves ridding the world of suffering by tolerating it for millennia. This was hate speech, apparently. And as you can see, it has nothing to do whatsoever with Jehovah's Witnesses, with anything that Jehovah's Witnesses have produced. This was a worldly video game produced by Babylon the Great, by Christendom, where, I mean, I haven't played it or anything. Based on the trailer, I'm guessing you get to pretend you're Jesus and float around Palestine performing miracles. In any case, here is part of the trailer that I was commenting on. So I understand that perhaps my humour won't be appreciated by all of you, particularly those who are Christian or who hold a candle for the idea of Jesus Christ being a real person who performed miracles. Nonetheless, how is this hate speech? Or more to the point, how is it against the law in any way, shape or form to express this view? And it wasn't just a case, might I add, of offending people. I'm not really down with that. I'm not really down with offending people just for the sake of offending people. In fact, I've even spoken out on Twitter about atheists who seem to delight in offending the religious just to prove or just to demonstrate that they can. I'm not really supportive in any way of that behavior. I think that there are better ways of presenting the atheist argument than simply trying to shock people for the sake of it. This is not a case of that. Here I was making a point, really, with my humour. And by the way, I did actually debate whether to use the F word, but it just seemed to me that there are some cases in life where it is literally the only word that works. This was the only word that worked for me in presenting this argument. But there was a serious side to this tweet. You have here a game that is essentially presenting Jesus as a wizard who, again, goes around, wanders around 1st century Palestine, performing feats of magic. And this is something that he would only ever do just this once in history to prove that he had powers before disappearing, vanishing as I put it there, as part of an elaborate plan that involves ridding the world of suffering by tolerating it for millennia. That's one of many problems I have with Christianity. It takes the fact that there is suffering in the world and it effectively says, don't worry, there's a plan. We just need to wait a while. And when we say a while, we mean potentially even more centuries than have already passed since this guy Jesus showed up as part of the plan for getting rid of the suffering that we're still experiencing 2,000 years later. Seems an awful lot to me like just making excuses for the patently obvious fact that there is no plan. There is no God, no supernatural entity who intends to get rid of suffering. If he's so keen on getting rid of suffering, why is it taking him so long? Why does he need there to be so many centuries of suffering to demonstrate how awesome he is? So that was the point I was making in that tweet. But apparently it's against the law to express atheist views on Twitter. Who knew? Anyway, time for our first video. And this time we go all the way back to 2017.
Field ministry this weekend to offer the current magazine. Which one of those do you think that you'd like to use?
It was effective, but it was...
Before we go in the territory, do you mind if we make a stop first?
Today's our wedding anniversary.
I didn't know. I'm so sorry. When Sharon died, I was going through some especially raw days myself.
I keep getting flooded with memories.
That's normal. You know what my number one help was? Was prayer.
Though I don't know the heartache of losing a wife, I do know the heartache of losing a close family member, namely my mother, who died when I was 21. Looking back, though prayer may have delivered some short-lived psychological boost, much like a placebo, I can honestly say that there is no long-term practical benefit to the advice being offered here. Since all religions, including Jehovah's Witnesses, offer beliefs that are either not true or cannot be proven, prayer to any god is essentially an exercise of talking to yourself and consoling yourself with the notion that an invisible, all-powerful entity who likely could have prevented the death in the first place can somehow give you the strength to pull through.
Even before Satan's world can teach our children about sex, we can teach them. Learn from the Great Teacher, chapter 32, has beautiful questions. It helps us to understand what is in their heart and how much information they already know. Since we have already spoken to them about sex at this stage, we can talk about any serious matters in future without feeling awkward.
We lean on the counsel from the Bible regarding sexuality, and this has helped the children to fear Jehovah.
Every time that we go out to the fields to do our work, we are talking all the time with the children. I see that Jehovah has blessed these efforts. We do not have any problems amongst the children or with others.
Notice the continued focus on morality in general and making sure JW children are drilled on what the Bible's expectations are regarding sex. Safeguarding children from sexual predators, which is apparently the remit of parents and the children themselves, is now firmly in the rearview mirror, and the urgency of maintaining moral purity is now the hot topic. We lean on the counsel in the Bible regarding sexuality, says the mother in Africa, who is perhaps unaware that child sex abuse is specifically condemned nowhere in the scriptures. Apparently it slipped God's mind to instruct humans not to rape children when he was giving them his 10 commandments. Either that or coveting another man's livestock was deemed more worthy of prohibition.
People of all ages, but especially young ones, will enjoy this new 240-page book containing 103 lessons. The artwork is new and has been extensively researched, bringing the Bible to life and capturing the feelings of those depicted. Our hope is that all ages will enjoy this gift from our loving Father Jehovah as we all discover new lessons we can learn from the Bible.
So yes, that's the new book, Lessons You Can Learn from the Bible. I don't have a hard copy yet, but I have looked at the PDF, and to be completely honest, from what I can gather, it's certainly an improvement on the My Book of Bible Stories. There's certainly less imagery in there that's completely inappropriate for children, as was the case with the 1978 version. They do seem to have really toned down on the violence and the gore that you see in the My Book of Bible Stories. But the main problem, of course, both with the My Book of Bible Stories and Lessons You Can Learn from the Bible, is that these are instruments of child indoctrination. They are designed to make children believe from the earliest of ages that the Bible is to be taken literally, that everything it says is literally the Word of God, and the accounts and narratives contained in the Bible are historically accurate, that they really did happen. And the more you research the Bible objectively and look into the work of scholars and see what's been discovered in terms of archaeology by people who, many of whom set out to prove the Bible to be true and nevertheless came back empty-handed, the more you look into all of that, the more you realize that it's wrong to train children to believe that these accounts really happened. And a great example of a parent doing just that will be shown in the final video that was shown to witnesses, or is being shown to witnesses, on the Saturday of the convention. It's the latest, or one of the latest installments in the Caleb and Sophia Become Jehovah's Friend series, Be Humble, and it deals with the Tower of Babel.
She thought that she could win, but there was no way. Next year, I'll be the fastest kid in the entire school.
That's 'cause I'm not in your school.
Oh, please. Remember last time when I beat you in front of the whole congregation?
Caleb, do you remember this story?
Oh yeah, that's the Tower of Babel.
The story of the Tower of Babel in Genesis is supposed to explain why humans speak so many different languages. According to the account in Genesis chapter 11, when humans started to organize together into a large city, they conspired to build an immense tower in defiance of God. But God stepped in and confused their efforts by giving them all different languages, causing them to disperse throughout the earth. Of course, there is zero evidence to support this myth, which is also the case with pretty much all the stories described in the first 5 books of the Bible, otherwise known as the Pentateuch. So it's a little bit confusing if you're following along in the document itself. And incidentally, the full 9-page dossier is now available for you to follow along in the description below. And we're discussing, again, page 9, the final page. Ordinarily, when CCJW, if they were examining one video, they would group all of the quotes that they found offensive or hate speech in one paragraph, just giving the timestamps, or actually sometimes not giving the timestamps. But in any case, they would group all of their issues with a given video in one paragraph. This time, they've split one video into 3 paragraphs, and they've mixed the order. So the first quote from this video actually appears further down on the page. The second quote appears near the top of the page and the third one slightly after it. So I'm not sure why they've done it that way. It's all a little bit confusing. In any case, the first example is where I say prayer to any god is essentially an exercise of talking to yourself, ... They might as well have just included the whole sentence. It's not like it was a long sentence, but here's what I went on to say. And consoling yourself with the notion that an invisible, all-powerful entity who likely could have prevented the death in the first place can somehow give you the strength to pull through. I think that context is useful because I'm obviously commenting on the idea of people who are going through a bereavement being told, oh, the solution is prayer. Prayer is your go-to means of fixing this particular problem. And in the context, again, which doesn't serve Watchtower's purpose, I explain that I've been through a bereavement. I lost my mother, and I was on the receiving end of this sort of advice. And I can imagine, from a psychological point of view, it giving you some sort of comfort to at least feel like you're getting stuff off your chest. But objectively speaking, or at least from the perspective of someone who isn't religious anymore, which is me, and I'm sure will describe many of you as well, prayer is an exercise of talking to yourself. And therefore, it's questionable as to whether it holds any real value if that's going to be one of the main solutions that you're giving someone who has, in this case, lost their wife, albeit it's a dramatization, it's not real. I'm struggling to see the hate speech, to be honest. I'm struggling to see hate speech of any kind at all. In fact, I might just say that even though I am outspoken with my atheism, I know that many of you watching this video and watching my channel are still theists or are still religious in some form. I know because you comment on my videos and tell me so. And yet it's clear that what I'm saying is not so outrageous and not so gratuitously hurtful that you guys are unsubscribing or going elsewhere. You seem to be comfortable sticking around because, credit to you, you're happy to hear the other side of the argument. You're happy to hear other people's views. You're happy to hear the views of people who disagree with your views. Well, you can understand why that wouldn't be the mindset of the legal department of Jehovah's Witnesses. For them, anyone who doesn't share their precise religious views is worthy of destruction at an imminent Armageddon. You have to ask, is their view of what is or isn't hate speech really finely calibrated, or is it based in reality, or is it more likely based in their personal religious convictions? Anyway, also in this video, I'm commenting on the fact that nowhere in the Bible is there specifically a verse that condemns child sexual abuse. And that's a fact. It's true. You can find verses condemning incest, but as I've explained before, incest needn't involve child sexual abuse. So you can have incest between a parent and their child where the child is grown up and they're no longer a minor, and that would still be incest. So the Bible condemns incest or parents having sex with their children, but it doesn't expressly say anywhere, and it's a big book, it's a big old book, the Bible. You'd think that God would have squeezed it in there somewhere, but nowhere in the Bible does it expressly say you should not have sex with a child. And surely that should be in there. That's the point I'm making. In fact, interestingly, they miss out the part of the quote where I explain this more emphatically. Apparently, it slipped God's mind to instruct humans not to rape children when he was giving them his 10 commandments. Either that or coveting another man's livestock was deemed more worthy of prohibition. Yeah, I wonder why they didn't include the livestock part. Because it is difficult to defend that, isn't it? The Bible has more to say about coveting another man's livestock, another man's animals, than it has to say about expressly condemning child sex abuse. And apparently it's hate speech for me to point this out. And finally, in this video, I am discussing child indoctrination, and this is in response to the launch of the book Lessons You Can Learn from the Bible, basically the replacement to My Book of Bible Stories. And this, for me, is a clear misquote, because let's look at it. It says, it's wrong to train children to believe that these Bible accounts really happened. Well, I'm not arguing with them putting Bible in there in the bracket, because I was talking about Bible accounts and I was explaining that Bible scholars have devoted their careers to understanding the Bible and figuring out which parts were likely to have happened and which parts couldn't have happened. But then there's the infamous ... the ellipses, and it jumps to me saying, of course, there is zero evidence to support this myth. So we've gone from talking about accounts in the plural to me saying this myth in the singular, indicating that I'm referring to a specific myth. And indeed I was. The ... or ellipses covered over me talking about the story of the Tower of Babel. So the story of God confusing the languages of those building the Tower of Babel. And that's apparently where all the languages that humans now speak come from, this specific event of humans building a tower and God not liking the fact that the tower was getting so high so that it was nearly touching the heavens, and stopping the whole thing by making it so that they couldn't communicate with each other by giving them all these languages. And that's the origin of different languages. Clearly a myth. That's clearly not where we get all our languages from. But Watchtower denudes my words of context so that it looks like I am declaring all Bible stories, all Bible accounts to be a myth. And I actually don't hold that position. I do think, well, I don't think, I know that at least some accounts in the Bible did happen. For example, you can go to Jerusalem and you can visit Hezekiah's tunnel. There is archaeological evidence for many of the Judean line of kings that are described in the Bible. So I don't claim that none of that happened. It's just that when you're going further back in the Old Testament, specifically into the Pentateuch, I'm sorry, there's just no historical, archaeological evidence that any of these things happened. There certainly isn't evidence that God originated all the languages by essentially halting a building project, which is what the Bible tells us. And the point I'm making is it's wrong to fill the heads of children with this stuff as though it really happened. Just because it suits you, just because it's easier for you if your children share your religion unquestioningly, to sit down with them with a brightly illustrated book and just fill their minds with this as though it's fact, as though it's unquestioned fact, this stuff really happened, I was commenting on the fact that that is wrong. And I stand by that opinion, and that opinion certainly isn't hate speech. Anyway, next video. This time we're going slightly forward in time to the year 2019.
Superficially, we might say, well, we learned that Abraham was born 2 years after Noah, and we proved that Jonathan was at least 30 years older than David, and that Moses and Job definitely lived at the same time. Superficially, we got the answers to those questions, yes. But the fact is, probably none of those questions ever kept you up at night. There's a broader picture here. What we'd like you to take away is the fact that sometimes a number is more than just a number. It can provide information that we couldn't get any other way. And if we can understand that, this discussion will have been well worth having. So, when you see a number in the Bible, don't run the other way. Embrace it. Stop and think about it. You may be glad you did.
Embrace the number, take the number, and hold it in a passionate embrace. You've got to love those numbers, because sometimes a number is more than just a number, apparently. Well, David, sometimes a number is just a number, especially a number in a man-made book full of human wisdom, full of contradictions, full of terrible morals, and full of chilling stories. And for me, this little lecture at the end about, sometimes a number is more than just a number, is I'm almost hearing an echo of Russell here. Where is the hate speech? I ask you, where is it? I'm making a perfectly sound, logical observation that to get all obsessive about numbers in the context of a book that is full of contradictions and grotesque, immoral stories isn't productive. And in fact, it's this sort of obsession with numbers that gave us the Jehovah's Witness religion to begin with, because Charles Taze Russell was obsessed with numbers and pyramidology and trying to come up with dates for the end times. So I guess I'll leave it to you viewers to decide where the hate speech is. I can't find it. It seems again that Watchtower is just being extremely discriminatory, even though they jump up and down about religious freedoms and their freedom to practice their religion as they see fit. Apparently they don't want me to have freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. They don't want me to have the freedom to express my opinions on the Bible. Isn't that interesting? And highly hypocritical. But we must move on to our next example, which is also from 2019, albeit slightly earlier. This is from the March 2019 JW Broadcasting rebuttal.
As Christians, we're most interested in the example of Christ. If ever there was a person who could make a difference in countering injustice, it was Jesus. He felt deep compassion for people. And with his abilities to feed the hungry, heal the sick, raise the dead, and reach hearts with his winsome words, Jesus could have exerted invincible influence in the realm of politics. Jesus didn't take sides. He refused to become a world ruler, a national leader, or a political activist. Did that mean that Jesus didn't care, that he had no opinion? To the contrary, Jesus cared more deeply than we can fathom. And by treating people fairly, Jesus promoted justice at the most fundamental level. Still, his principal focus was on teaching people about the kingdom of God, which would eliminate injustice for all time.
So what we have here is an appeal to authority. And if you are a Christian watching this, you'll say, well, what better authority to appeal to than Jesus? He is the ultimate authority. We should imitate him in everything. But quite frankly, it's impossible to imitate Jesus in everything. You can only ever be selective in the extent to which you follow the commands of Jesus and the example set by Jesus. And I'm going to demonstrate that. If you'll bear with me, this might be difficult if you are a Christian, but allow me to demonstrate how following what Jesus said to the letter would be a mistake, would be detrimental to someone's welfare. So Jehovah's Witnesses believe that there's no grounds for divorce if there isn't adultery. And they follow this to the degree that you could be being physically assaulted by your spouse and you're still not allowed to divorce them. The best you can hope for is a separation, which means that you're not free to marry someone else. In other words, you're not free to move on with your life. You have to remain tethered in some way to this toxic person. And the reason why, where this idea derives from, is the words of Jesus, Matthew 5:31 and 32. Moreover, it was said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. However, I say to you that everyone divorcing his wife, except on account of sexual immorality, makes her a subject for adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Whatever you want to say about Watchtower's dreadful, dreadful approach to domestic violence, it stems from these words and words like them by Jesus. So the point I'm trying to make, I'm not trying to convince people that you can't be Christian. Clearly, there are lots of Christians who manage to be fine, moral, upstanding people who are able to square the circle and not follow all of these words obsessively or to the letter. And I'm grateful for that, for their sake, more than anything. But the point is that if you're going to use Jesus as an appeal to authority, as David Schaefer is here doing in trying to convince witnesses that they're not allowed to be political, you have to do so selectively. And even Jehovah's Witnesses do this selectively, because you don't see Jehovah's Witnesses selling all their belongings and giving them to the poor, thankfully. Although you do see them, to some degree, applying that principle in making themselves poor for the betterment of Watchtower. The point is that it simply cannot be said that every word that fell out of the mouth of Jesus, as recorded in the New Testament, was good. Some of it was just downright silly. A lot of it seems to have been said with the assumption that the end of the world was imminent, when it clearly wasn't, with hindsight. So it's a mistake for David Schaefer to point to Jesus as an example of why Jehovah's Witnesses should be entirely disengaged from what's happening in the world around them. Because if you're going to point to Jesus as the reason for that, you then have to explain why you're not also following the words of Jesus to the letter in other areas. Again, as I alluded to earlier, these are my personal views as an atheist, and I do not expect everyone to share them. I don't demand that my viewers feel the way I do about Jesus or the Bible. But did you notice how the part where I made comments to this effect, I gave a disclaimer, if you will, that's nowhere to be seen in the quote that CCJW has prepared. Let's just listen. These words and words like them by Jesus. So the point I'm trying to make, I'm not trying to convince people that you can't be Christian. Clearly, there are lots of Christians who manage to be fine, moral, upstanding people who are able to square the circle and not follow all of these words obsessively or to the letter. And I'm grateful for that, for their sake more than anything. Bear in mind that the whole premise of this page of the document is based on the idea of intolerance. In the footnote, it condemns statements that incite religious intolerance, not specifically for Jehovah's Witnesses, but more generally regarding belief in God, Jesus, and the Bible. How is that intolerance? I've literally said it's totally fine if you want to be a Christian and believe in God, Jesus, and the Bible. And I'm grateful for the fact that there are many who are Christians and who do believe in God, Jesus, and the Bible, who would condemn this sort of extreme black and white thinking on domestic violence. And I was making the perfectly sound, scripturally supported point that Watchtower's stance on domestic violence, which puts abused spouses in danger and tells them there's no way out unless there is some form of adultery, I was making the point that this comes from Jesus, comes from the Bible. And so it is a mistake, as David Schaefer was there suggesting, to say, oh, well, if it comes from the Bible, it's great. If it comes from the Bible, it's good. It's going to work. It's going to make sense. It's going to improve people's lives. Not true. And there's a very clear example. And apparently by making this argument, I was doing something illegal. I was spewing hate speech. Just incredible. Anyway, thankfully, there's only one more example left, and then I can set this dossier to one side, at least for now. Our final example requires us to go back to the year 2017. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, hang on, if you're an atheist, why are you so bothered about what the Bible does or doesn't say about a governing body or an organization? You know, surely it doesn't matter to you if the Bible isn't inspired of God. And yes, it's true, I don't believe in the God of the Bible, and I don't think there are good reasons for assuming that the Bible is the infallible word of the creator of the universe and prescribes in detail how we should live our lives. That said, if I were to be a believer, if I were to believe in God and assume the Bible to be his inerrant word, it just so happens that the beliefs and practices and teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses don't line up with the Bible anyway. And that's the whole point I'm trying to make with what I've just said now about the account in Acts 15 and 16, with showing you the words of Fred Franz when he was giving his remarkable speech against the whole concept of a governing body. Even if you assume, and I'm sure there are many people watching this who are believers and do believe in God, even if you make those assumptions and say God does exist and the Bible is his word, there are no good reasons for viewing the Bible through the lens of Watchtower and saying there was this corporate structure in the first century Christians and they decided on everything and they directed people and decided who went where and who should do what, and they organized everything. Reading the New Testament on its own terms entirely debunks that idea. And one thing I didn't mention just now, if you think about it, a lot of the teachings that are central to Christianity didn't come from Jesus and didn't come from the apostles. And a great example is the fact that nowhere does Jesus talk about gay people, about homosexuality, or men lying with men. You have to read on to the writings of the Apostle Paul before you get to all that nonsense. And yet Paul wasn't one of the 12. He wasn't based in Jerusalem. He couldn't have been in this governing body arrangement. And yet there he is, sailing all around the Mediterranean, writing these letters, which end up being central tenets of the doctrine of Christianity, to the point where today in the 21st century, people just assume that Jesus and God hate gay people because of what Paul wrote.
Ephesians chapter 1, verse 22, is speaking of Jehovah's actions in connection with Jesus. It says, he also subjected all things under his feet and made him head over all things with regard to the congregation. We see the structure of the organization taking shape. Jehovah is the universal sovereign, the king, directing the millions of angels making up his heavenly organization. But when it comes to directing the visible earthly part of God's organization, he has delegated that responsibility to Jesus, the head of the congregation of God.
If I'd been watching this sort of thing years ago as an indoctrinated witness, all of this would have made perfect sense. Oh yes, well, God has his heavenly and earthly organization, and it's problematic for him to organize everything himself, so he's delegating his angels to deal with running galaxies and what have you. And he's delegating the running of his earthly organization to Jesus, and everything's just one big organization. And only now, that I'm awakened from again my preoccupation with superstition, do I look at this and think, this has man-made all over it. I mean, isn't God supposed to be omnipotent? Isn't he supposed to be able to do anything he wants, just like that? Why is he so terrible at multitasking, apparently? Why does he need so many people working for him, like some kind of mafia boss? I mean, this has, again, human fingerprints all over it. This is basically humans projecting the way they think onto the God they want to worship. And it's apparently hate speech to make that argument. It's illegal. It's perpetuating or inciting religious intolerance for me to draw those conclusions from what I see Tony Morris and others doing, cherry-picking verses from the Bible in support of their authority. Actually, I found it fascinating that the legal department were poring over this video in particular, trying to find incriminating things to say about me, because this was the July 2017 JW Broadcasting episode. I actually mentioned this in a recent video. This was actually part 1 of my review of the 2020 annual meeting. Thumbnail here. Tony Morris began by again stressing the authority of the governing body based on Acts chapters 15 and 16, using the exact same quotes, the exact same logic, and I pointed people in my rebuttal to this video, and I said, rather than repeat the exact same arguments all over again, just watch my rebuttal here. But this particular video includes footage of Fred Franz, not Ray Franz, Fred Franz, footage of Fred Franz, who is a respected figure in Jehovah's Witness Watchtower history, giving a talk in which he biblically dismantles the concepts of the governing body. I'm not joking. Go to this video, my rebuttal of the July 2017 JW Broadcasting episode, or the recent 2020 annual meeting rebuttal, because I have the recording in there as well. I include a recording and transcript on the screen of the relevant part where Fred Franz argues that in the first century, there was no central authority. Individuals could just do what they wanted if they felt they were being directed by God or Jesus. That was what he argued in the relevant talk. It fascinates me to think of individuals from the legal department working at Bethel having to watch such damning material. I mean, it's one thing for them to be listening to my arguments as an apostate, but they had to sit through Fred Franz dismantling the whole concept of a governing body, which they depend on, really. It's part of their everyday life as a Bethelite to acknowledge the governing body's authority. Anyway, apparently it was hate speech for me to be pointing out that God shouldn't need a human hierarchy here on the earth to be getting things done, and indeed that a lot of the central tenets of Christianity seem to come from the Apostle Paul rather than Jesus Christ. Wasn't it interesting that they again completely misquoted me? Maybe you caught it. And they've done this before on at least 2 occasions where when they've been quoting me, they've literally removed things that I've said from the quote without using the ellipsis. So if you're going to remove part of what I've said, you damn well better use at least the ... And then we can at least see that you're zeroing in on certain things rather than quoting the full context. We can at least see that. But here, CCJW put a full stop after where I say a lot of the teachings that are central to Christianity didn't come from Jesus and didn't come from the apostles. Full stop. Full stop. And then you have to read on to the writings of the Apostle Paul. Let's see what it actually, or what I actually said here. Teachings that are central to Christianity didn't come from Jesus and didn't come from the apostles. And a great example is the fact that nowhere does Jesus talk about gay people, about homosexuality, or men lying with men. You have to read on to the writings of the Apostle Paul before you get to all that nonsense. And yet Paul wasn't one of the 12. Isn't that fascinating? They got rid of that part. That part didn't look so good in their 9-page dossier. I wonder why. I wonder why that was awkward for them. In a dossier about hate speech, I wonder why it was awkward for them to include me pointing out that Jesus Christ didn't say anything about gay people. It was only the Apostle Paul, at least in the New Testament. It was only the Apostle Paul that seemed to have an axe to grind when it comes to gay people. I wonder why that was an issue for them. Could it be that they are against gay people, that they are homophobic, and they want to kind of sweep that whole thing under the rug? They felt uncomfortable including that piece of information because it ignited all sorts of cognitive dissonance in the mind of whoever was compiling this quote. Oh yeah, we're guilty of hate speech when it comes to gay people. Isn't that interesting? I'm sure that's what was... Well, I can't be sure of what was going through their mind. Let me just be clear. But that surely had to be an issue for them. The fact that I was hinting at an area in which they have been prolific in hate speech as an organization, including as recently as the 2020 Always Rejoice Convention and Stephen Lett's infamous rant against gay people, in which he literally said that gay people who didn't get rid of their gayness or didn't get rid of their homosexuality deserved to lose life. He literally said that. Apparently that's not hate speech, but it is hate speech for me to criticize the Bible and draw attention to the fact that many of the central tenets of Christianity don't in fact come from Jesus, but from people who professed or claimed that Jesus was guiding them. That's actually quite a poignant one to end on. We come to the end now, viewers, of the 9-page dossier. That's it. Again, download it from the link in the description if you want to read it yourself. The whole thing is now available. I've, up to this point, just been releasing it in parts. Now the whole thing is available for you to look at your leisure. But on that final point there of Watchtower being themselves guilty of hate speech, look out for a video in the future. I don't know what it will be titled exactly, but it will be something along the lines of 20 examples of the Jehovah's Witness leadership issuing hate speech. Something along those lines. Because now that they've accused me of hate speech, and now that I've had chance to debunk quote by quote, page by page, all of their misleading examples of hate speech. Let's not forget, viewers, this was an attempt at misleading a legal process. That's serious. The organization is so terrified of being exposed over their mishandling of child sex abuse that they are willing to lie about me and misquote me to get me thrown off so that it's an open field for them, an open goal. It will be easier for them to convince IICSA that everything's fine. I'm glad that they failed. I'm glad that IICSA didn't give this apparently a moment's thought. They did reply to it. Again, document in the description explaining why they wouldn't be proceeding with CCJW's request. But it doesn't seem that IICSA took any of this seriously. And why should they? It was, again, a tissue of lies from beginning to end. And this is an organization that calls itself the truth. This is an organization that accuses people like me of lying. People like me of trying to deceive people. If it's 10% correct, it's 100% misleading. Good grief. The hypocrisy of it all continues to rile me, viewers, even though, again, it's almost a compliment to be paid this much scrutiny by the organization, to have Bethelites in Bethel, presumably at their computers, monitoring every word that I'm saying in dozens of videos. Even though that does give me some pleasure, I can't deny that I am still genuinely rattled at this. Because how dare they? Just the gall and the hypocrisy of it is staggering. And I'm glad that I've done this series, if only to help people see that, if only to give people an insight into the depths of the lies, the depths of the dishonesty of this organization. If they can do this with me, then what's stopping them from doing this in any child abuse lawsuit or any situation in which the organization is being held accountable? What's stopping them from lying so freely in those situations? If you take nothing else away from this series, especially if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, please give that some thought. But that's it. That brings us to the end of this series. Again, look out for a video in the not too distant future where I list 20 examples that are hate speech, not coming from me, but coming from the Jehovah's Witness leadership. But that's everything. That's all I have for you. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.